I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars. Next to me is the GWM Tank 500. This is one of the vehicles that I've really been looking forward to testing this year. We were on the Australian launch. My colleague Dan Gardner drove this car on dirt and on country roads down in Victoria, but I've been waiting to get it into the Chasing Cars garage here in Sydney, where we can fully test the Tank 500 in our own environment, in the suburbs, on the highway, on difficult country roads, on trails. I've done all that, so now I can really tell you, is the Tank 500 too good to be true? On paper, it kind of looks that way. This one is the hybrid Ultra, 73,990 drive away, a little bit more for the premium Onyx silver paint on this car. It's a solid 20 grand less than the outgoing Prado Kakadu, about 10 grand less than a Ford Everest V6 in the platinum trim. So can it possibly make sense? Well, yes and no. But I'm increasingly convinced that GWM is actually going in the right direction and that their cars are getting better. More on that in today's review, but we're going to start where this vehicle has a major difference to rivals. That's under the bonnet. Before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Direct. Now, it isn't just the imposing facade of the Tank 500, complete with Tank logo and this symphony in chrome. You're definitely not going to miss this thing out on the road. No, the more interesting piece of the puzzle is actually what's underneath this bonnet, which has gas struts. Very nice to see, as always. What you're going to find there is a surprisingly small engine because the Tank 500 is a hybrid. Well before Toyota has seen fit to deliver a Prado hybrid for our market, GWM has already stepped in. What we have here is a 2-litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder engine making 180 kilowatts on its own, and then we also have an electric motor and a small battery. The E-motor contributes only 78 kilowatts of power, but a good healthy amount of torque for combined outputs of 255 kilowatts of power, almost 650 Newton meters of torque. It's interesting because the next gen Toyota Prado is likely to pick up a hybrid for Australia alongside the diesel in time. That is a 2.4-litre turbo petrol in the Toyota, but outputs are similar. Now, GWM has designed the system themselves. It all runs through a GWM developed 9-speed torque converter auto with selectable 4-wheel drive. Can it actually work properly and smoothly in the real world? All will be revealed in this test. Before we chat about the interior of the Tank 500, I want to make sure that you're following our social media profiles on TikTok and Instagram, where we publish all of our behind the scenes stuff and the car news of the day. So make sure you check them out if you're on those platforms. Now, onto the interior of the Tank 500. Now, for the one that I wanted to test, I've gone all out. I've gone for the Ultra 73,990 drive away, because that's a really interesting price point. Cheaper than an Everest Platinum, much cheaper than a Prado Kakadu in terms of the drive away prices of those vehicles. And yet you are getting into a 4-wheel drive that actually feels more like a car-based SUV inside. This is a body-on-frame vehicle with a proper 4-wheel drive system, low range, and even twin lockers on the Ultra for your front and rear, and yet the cabin feels more like, I would say, an Aldi version of like an Audi Q7, and I actually mean that in a good way. The fit and finish is what is really coming along in leaps and bounds at GWM. We're seeing similar things in other Chinese manufacturers that have nothing to do with GWM, like MG. But with GWM, we're kind of moving quite swiftly along from the cheap and nasty to what's starting to feel like just a good deal. This is not a luxury car in terms of like the most genuine materials. We're not talking burled woods and genuine metals and stuff. But in terms of the effect when you're sitting up here, it feels pretty nice. It feels much nicer than a Toyota Prado, and it feels a good step nicer than a Ford Everest as well. And even the build quality and how things are screwed together, not bad. Genuinely not bad. You can go and try it out for yourself. In terms of the tech, this screen here is really going to dominate proceeding. It's a 14.6-inch touchscreen. It is very bright, including at night, where I've had to turn it all the way down and I can't seem to get it any darker, but it's daytime now and that's okay. Got my wireless CarPlay up here. That was easy to pair, works really well, and you even get a tiny little mirrored version of your maps in the center screen as well when you're on CarPlay. If you're not using smartphone mirroring, you actually get a much bigger, cooler looking integrated map if you want it in your center cluster here, which is pretty cool. Now the screen, if we go to the GWM area, isn't too bad, But you do have to go digging through complicated menus to change some of the systems, including your safety systems, which is going to become very, very important when we take this car for a drive, because there's a bunch of systems that aren't tuned well that you're going to need to deactivate every time you drive through this touchscreen. Thankfully, it isn't too bad. Couple of quirks though, if you're in CarPlay, you can't see your temperature. So you actually have to leave CarPlay and go to the climate and then change your temperature. Not the end of the world. What might be the end of the world if you have a picky passenger is the volume control, because there is no volume control for anyone other than the driver. You can only adjust it through the steering wheel, which is weird. Why is there not like a knob down here somewhere? That was clearly forgotten about. It's little mistakes like that which show you where GWM still has work to do, but a lot of the core stuff is getting much better. Like quality, materials, decent, the Infinity audio system's good enough. The seats actually are really nice. Covered in Nappa leather, heated and cooled in the front, also heated and cooled in the second row, which is amazing. Lots of electric adjustment, you got lumbar, you even have massage. Oddly, again, you have to activate that through the screen. On most cars, that would be a button down here on the seat somewhere. But I've been comfy driving this car. The seat gets nice and low, the steering wheel feels good, you got paddle shifters for your 9-speed auto. The view out is commanding as well. So in terms of the appeal when you're in the showroom, I think you're going to really feel it. And it mostly works well, even if some of the software is a bit lacking in that final polish. So that's the front. Let's check out the back. All right, you join me here in the second row of the Tank 500 because unlike the Tank 300, this is actually a 3-row vehicle, and we will check out the third row in just a minute. But I think most families that go for a Tank 500 will prefer to use it as a 2-row car most of the time with a big boot. And of course, you've got the convenient occasional third row if you want to use it, because it is not massive. That's the case with most body-on-frame vehicles. But the packaging of the second row is miles better than many other cars in this segment. You've got more room, not just on a Prado, but also more room than a 300 series back here with the driver's seat in my position. I'm 6 foot tall, 183 centimeters. I've got another few inches of headroom beneath this panoramic sunroof. Legroom's outstanding, tow room is good, and the seat base is properly inclined. So honestly, it's very comfortable and fine back here for several hours on a road trip. Plus, those plush materials continue into the second row, all nice and soft on the door. You've even got things like sun blinds. You've got your roof-mounted air vents. So compared to something really trucky like an Isuzu M-UX, this is miles better for kind of only a little bit of extra money compared to that car. So definitely worth thinking about. Now, we also have some quirks. The usual ones, like a flip-down armrest with integrated cup holders, that's nothing special. Something down here is special. Beneath more air vents, we have controls for the aircon in the back, and we also have controls for the ventilated outboard seats. Now, unlike the front, where you've just got one speed of seat ventilation or seat heating, here in the back, we don't have one speed, we have 9 speeds. I have never seen that in any car I've reviewed. About the most you'd see is 3, maybe 4, but you can seriously fine-tune the seat ventilation in this car, only in the back seats though. How strange. Still, I kind of love it. Let's check out the third row. Now that we come to the third row, we do start to find a few compromises with this vehicle. The space actually isn't bad, as I'll show you, but the access is, and that's because GWM didn't bother to convert the left-hand drive, right-hand drive situation with this vehicle. So the easy curbside access, the sort of access kids can use to get in here nice and easy on the school run, is on the roadside here in Australia. That really should have been converted, and it isn't just a simple case that like the big block of the 60/40 second row is on this side. We see that from time to time. The small side, the light side is over here. It's the fact that you can't do the tilt and slide on the curbside seats. You can only do it on the roadside seat. There's a bit of a safety issue there for me. Then there's the fact that while we have the third row, and that's very good, you really do get the sense that you're right back here. The glass is right there. In fact, the headrests for the third row are right in the aperture for the rear glass. So not making any comment either way, just that it's slightly disconcerting when you climb into the back of this vehicle because it's been pushed right to the end of the cabin. Now, in terms of the space, let me bring this seat back here. Now, that is actually all the way back. That's how I showed you how it was in the second row, and I've actually still got enough space. So for occasional transport for adults, it'll be fine. Smaller kids will be swimming in room here. Let me push this back out of the way so you can see a bit more. We also have cup holders. We've got the electric controls replicated for the third row right here. Again, it's on the wrong side. It should be on the other side, the curb side for Australia, but we do have our air vents here. We've got more speakers here as well, so even those right in the way back can still hear the music. And there are nice little features like the fact that there are clips for the second row seat belts so they don't rattle around while you're driving, although this one has fallen off. I do have it somewhere though. Moving around to the back of the Tank 500 now. For me, aesthetically, this is the most successful angle. I kind of like that Americana vibe of this vehicle. Some would say maybe it's a little bit dated cosmetically, but I actually find it kind of homely and attractive. You may very well disagree. You're welcome to do so down below in the comments. If there's one thing aesthetically that doesn't work for me, it's the small wheels. Now, they do lend themselves to a plush ride. You have got more options in terms of all-terrain tires you could fit to this vehicle, but overseas, you can get a slightly larger wheel, which aesthetically works a bit better for me. Now, you are going to notice the rear mounted spare, something which is standard on the outgoing Prado, but is going away on that Toyota as it reverts to a flat tailgate in next generation form. Now, on the Toyota, the reason it has a rear mounted spare is for extra fuel capacity, but you're not getting that on the Tank. We've just got an 80-litre fuel tank as standard on this vehicle, so perhaps this could have been packaged better. Either way, what you are getting is a side hinge door. Now, some people love this because you can just reach in and grab something small. If you do need to open the full door, you're going to have a little bit of extra room behind the vehicle compared to most flat tailgates, which take up a little bit less space at the back of the car when open. We've got the Tank 500 in 5-seat mode. We're carrying all of our AV gear. The literage is in the 700 range. That's okay for the class. Your load height is relatively high here though, so you're going to have to hoik stuff into the back. One nice thing though is that the third row is actually deployable electronically, which is quite a premium feature. But do that and you're not going to have much load space left. It's actually under 100 litres, which is virtually nothing. Now, it certainly warrants a mention that towing is a little bit down on the Tank 500 compared to most vehicles in the segment. It's 3,000 kilos braked, but the payload at 790 kilos is better than some vehicles in this segment, and the gross combined mass is actually enormous, over 6,700 kilos, higher than we would normally expect if you add together the other measurements, so still getting to the bottom of that claim from GWM. Now, we need to talk about running costs because unlike virtually every other vehicle in the segment, this is not a diesel, this is a petrol hybrid four-wheel drive with a proper 4x4 system. So what does all of that do to fuel economy? Well, I noticed the reports that came off the national Australian launch of this car were indicating pretty high fuel consumption, like 13 litres per 100 Ks, which sounded pretty bad. What I've noticed though is driving this vehicle in normal environments, not pounding it on a launch, off-road, high speed, lots of acceleration, the fuel economy is actually not as bad as what was initially reported. The claim is 8.5 litres per 100 Ks. That's definitely optimistic. What I found is that for my commute, which is about 25 Ks daily, driven sensibly, mostly in urban environments, I was able to get 11 litres per 100 kilometres out of the Tank 500, which isn't too bad, maybe a touch more than something like a diesel Prado or an Everest, but not crazy. On the highway, you're going to get into the very high single figures, like the high 9s, which again isn't too bad when you're getting petrol refinement. This thing does not have a Clattery 4-cylinder diesel, which is a strength in its own right. It's not like a Toyota hybrid like a RAV4 where you're going to see 5 litres per 100 Ks. It's double that, but you're kind of not that far off diesel efficiency. Plus, a couple of other tricks of the Tank 500 sleeve. Firstly, it can take 91 octane fuel, so you don't have to put premium petrol in this thing. 80-litre fuel tank at $2 a litre, it's going to cost you $160 to fill. You can expect a range kind of in that 800 kilometre mark out on the highway, which again is not too shabby, even if the best diesel vehicles in the segment will give you over 1,000 kilometres. Now, overseas, you can get the Tank 500 with a petrol V6 or with a diesel. GWM is not bringing those vehicles to Australia right now because of emissions. In 2025, Australia looks to be moving to a new vehicle emission standard system, and the CO2 output of this car is actually only 199 grams per kilometre. An Everest V6 diesel is over 220. So on the credit-based system that Australia looks like it will adopt, GWM will actually be able to sell the Tank 500 hybrid much more easily than Ford will be able to with the Everest V6 diesel, for instance. So that's why they've chosen the petrol hybrid for our market. What about the other aspects of running costs? Servicing, not the cheapest in segment, $2,750 across 5 years and 70,000 kilometers. And Everest is about $1,000 cheaper for 4 years, which is the maximum that Ford currently caps. Warranty is 7 years unlimited kilometers, pretty good. 8 years unlimited kilometers on the high voltage stuff, including the 1.7 kilowatt hour battery. Okay, time for us to take the Tank 500 for a drive, which starts with a bit of entertainment as we push the start button. Okay, for some reason my seat position hasn't come back, so I need to do that again. That feels about right, but wait, it's not over yet. Let's go into drive. Okay, that's a little unusual. Now, with the soundtrack stuff out of the way, sorry, I'm actually not ready to start driving. Back into park, because we've got to do what I call the 8 taps. So we go into our car settings, we go to cabin monitoring, we turn off the driver monitoring system. There you go, smart drive, lane assist, and turn off the emergency lane keep assist. And then back to CarPlay. Why? I'll tell you why as we take this thing for a drive. But first, I want to start with the area the Tank 500 is different from the rest of the pack. Let's listen. That doesn't sound like much. Unlike a rattly 4-cylinder diesel like you get in most other vehicles of this type at this sort of price point, the Tank is not only a petrol, it's a petrol-electric hybrid. And it is a series parallel hybrid. So it starts out under electric power on a light throttle, and then as you demand more, I wanted to accelerate to 80 on this country road, the 2-litre turbo petrol engine comes back into the fore, and it fires up relatively smoothly, probably not Toyota smooth, but the point is right now in this country, in this market, Toyota doesn't have a hybrid engine available in this segment. GWM does, and they stand alone right now. I expect we will see a lot more hybrid engines in vehicles like this if Australia adopts, as is planned, the proposed emissions scheme for new cars, because it's going to start making it difficult for manufacturers to sell lots of vehicles with high CO2 ratings measured in grams per kilometre. The Tank 500 hybrid isn't so bad on that measure. It's much cleaner than most vehicles that it competes with. So I think we're going to see this sort of recipe more commonly. So does it work? Well, for everyday kind of driving, it absolutely works. Now, I have not hitched up a trailer to this vehicle. I would like to do a tow test with the Tank 500, test out its 3,000 kilo brake towing capacity with the hybrid system. So let's pencil that in for a future video. Instead, I've driven around, had a bunch of people in the car, had a bunch of cargo in the car, and I can tell you that in virtually all situations apart from towing, which I haven't yet tested, the petrol hybrid system is more than sufficient, and in fact the performance is better than some of the diesel vehicles in this segment. I think the diesel V6 in the Ford Everest is probably still the best powertrain in this segment, but the petrol hybrid is really convincing and works very, very well in the Tank. So the petrol itself, 180 kilowatts of power, then you got the electric motor coming to the fore, making another 78 kilowatts, but big instant electric torque. So together, 255 kilowatts, just over 640 Newton meters is the claim. Those numbers are pretty impressive. More torque than the Everest V6. And that's pretty much how it feels out on the road, because as you start accelerating away, you can feel through the pedal, through your forward momentum, both sources making a contribution. The other thing that you don't really notice is noise. I've already taken a couple of pot shots at 4-cylinder diesels. They are not good to listen to in these sorts of vehicles. Sometimes they're damped out, sometimes they're not. Point is, the Tank 500 is much more relaxing to drive because you're not listening to a loud agricultural engine. It is hushed, it doesn't require big RPMs because it's got a turbo, it's got an electric motor, it can just cruise around on light throttle applications. And trust me, it makes your life better, particularly if you're getting out of one of the louder vehicles in this segment. You'll be like, oh my gosh, this is so luxurious. Interestingly, GWM uses its own 9-speed torque converter auto in this car, and frankly, the gearbox seems to work okay. My colleague Kurt Dupre did notice a little bit of fluttering at low speed, but I wasn't particularly bothered by it, didn't notice it all that much. I think, occasionally you notice the electric motor waking up, but most of the rest of the time, the whole system just stays out of the way and does what it's meant to do and works quite smoothly. One problem with the Tank 500 compared to some of its rivals is there is no full-time full drive mode for the blacktop. You're in rear wheel drive or you're in 4 high or 4 low. No sort of 4 auto like in the Ford Everest, which is a really nice feature. So at the moment I'm cruising along in rear drive. It's okay, but the road's a little slick today and you can generate wheel spin quite easily off all of that torque. The ride and handling, however, is pretty decent in this vehicle, especially for a body-on-frame model. There's a little bit of lateral shake over expansion joints, classic for this way of building a car, but I think it's plush and I think it rides and handles better than the outgoing Prado. The steering's a little vague. Again, you expect that in this segment. The ratios may be a bit slower than I might like, but it's composed, body control is decent, not far off something like a Nissan Patrol, which sits very nicely in the corners for something of its size and capability. The Tank 500 isn't that far off, and I think that is a compliment. Refinement, very good. The issue is the safety features. The tuning is not where it needs to be, particularly for how invasive the technologies are. The reason I turned off the driver monitoring system and the emergency lane keep system is because they are not slickly tuned. The driver monitoring is one of the most sensitive that I've tested, but I'm not in the habit of always turning the system off. Our long-term Hyundai Kona Electric, for instance, has driver monitoring, which I'm happy to keep on because it works just fine. But in this vehicle, look away for just a couple of seconds at your kids, at the screen, heck, even the speedometer, and you've got a voice in the car reading a long spiel about the importance of looking at the road, which is inappropriate and overstepping the mark of what a car should be doing to a fully licensed driver in the Australian market. GWM, you need to pull the system back. That binging was the car hearing its own name, of course. Then there's the emergency lane keep, which comes back on every time you start the car, even if the gentle lane keep is permanently turned off. Now, emergency lane keep should simply be called lane keep, because if you touch a line, if you move towards a line, the Tank 500 automatically wants to push you back away from it. The only problem being, if you've done that deliberately, say to give a cyclist a bit of room on a road like this, or perhaps you want to avoid a semi-trailer bowling towards you on a country single carriageway road, all normal situations where you don't want to be in the center of the lane. Nope, the Tank 500's not having any of it and it will fight you. Hence, when I drive this vehicle, I need to turn that system off because I want to be able to override it at will. What do you think about these systems? Are manufacturers going a little bit too far? I certainly think this vehicle is, but GWM has improved in leaps and bounds when it comes to the hardware, suspension, steering, powertrain, interior. They are capable of improving their software for the safety systems too, and I'm sure they'll give it a good stab. At least for now, you can turn them off. So those are my detailed opinions on the 2024 GWM Tank 500 in ultra hybrid trim. Frankly, I'm actually pretty convinced about this four-wheel drive. It has come in at a very fair price point for a highly specified petrol hybrid vehicle in this segment. Now, it's certainly not the sort of deep discount that we're used to seeing on utes like the GWM Cannon from this brand, but I think GWM is right to feel a little bit more confident in the Tank 500 because I think they're learning a lot very quickly, and they actually take on board criticism from owners and the media, which results in better cars, and that's what we're slowly seeing come out of this firm, which is interesting. Now, it is 20 grand cheaper than the old Prado Kakadu. I reckon the new Prado is going to be dearer than that again in top spec form, so this is priced well under that, and that's for a reason. GWM does not have the reputation that Toyota does. It does not have the service network that Toyota does in Australia. The cars are potentially not built as well as Toyota's. We don't know that now. It will take a long term of ownership in order to find out that data point. I'm not saying yes or no. But for now, the Tank 500 arrives as a pretty audacious vehicle in the segment. The dynamics are not bad. The interior is not bad. The cosmetics are not bad. The price is very sharp. I think this has to at least be test driven if you're shopping in the ute-based four-wheel drive category, or for something like a Prado or a Land Cruiser. At least check it out. I know it would be on my list to drive if I was shopping in that segment. The Achilles heel, the badly tuned safety features. At least you can turn them off, but GWM has to do a better job at this stuff. The software must improve. Those are my opinions. Very keen to know yours. Let me know down below this video in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.